All right, welcome back to the realm of history. We're here tonight for a little live review session for chapter 2. So I've got a little bit of preliminary ideas for you, and then we'll get into the question and answer session here shortly. What I have to start off, I'm going to show you the agenda for tonight. We're going to talk about, first of all, this is going to be a challenging quiz tomorrow. There's no doubt about it. We have to rise to the occasion. We know that this is going to be a challenging class, and so we have to make sure that we're ready. But don't shy away from a challenge. That's one of our big goals. We want to rise to those occasions and make sure that we're really ready to get a great grade on this chapter 2 quiz. Now, the second thing that we'll do is I'll go over one of the key figures that we didn't talk about too much in class. I'd like to talk about him a little bit more. Number 3, we'll go over quite a few of the key concepts. I want to make sure that you understand those, as those will primarily be the short answer portion of your content quiz. Then, if you stay with me, and a bonus for being here tonight, I've got a little AP practice quiz giveaway, little freebie action for you. I'm going to be going over some of the actual questions with you to give you an idea of what you're going to see. So that will be really beneficial for you in staying here with this session tonight. And then number 5, of course, just like we did last time, we'll do an open question and answer session where I'll be there to answer all of your questions from the chat. So let's go ahead and get started into the key figure. Right here, we have King Narmer. He's also known as Menes. And the most important thing to know about Narmer is remembering that prior to him, Egypt was divided up into 2 separate parts, Upper and Lower Egypt. These are really 2 individual kingdoms, and he is credited with uniting Upper and Lower Egypt around 3000 BC. So that's a key date. I don't think you need to actually memorize that date, but what you want to know is that prior to 3000, okay, Egypt was divided up into 2 independent kingdoms, Upper and Lower Egypt. He's credited with bringing those together into one unified kingdom/empire. Okay, so we can move on. Next, we're going to go into some of our key concepts. And if you look on your review sheet, which you should have with you, you're going to see that you have Sumerian inventions first. And those Sumerian inventions that you really want to know and zero in on are on your screen now: the wheel, the sail, the plow, of course, bronze, metalworking, and then cuneiform. Okay, so those are some of the key ideas and inventions that you're going to want to have down for the Sumerians. Now on to the second part of that, which is the Egyptian inventions. That's papyrus, hieroglyphics, the calendar system, as we saw in the video that we watched for section 2, mummification, and something that I want to add: the Egyptians were known to be the first surgeons. They would be able to set broken bones, such as the wrist or even the nose, and through the mummification process, they learned a great deal about human anatomy, because this is kind of gross, but they'd have to remove the internal organs before they would mummify the body, and they would place those organs in canisters and jars next to the body. So they would, by doing that process, they really learned a lot about human anatomy and became some of the first medical doctors in our world's history. Okay, the next key concept on our list is going to be about the Indus River Valley and its decline. If you remember, at the end of that section, there was a part that talked about earthquakes and the shifting of plate tectonics, which most likely altered the course and flood pattern of the Indus River. And that really led to the decline of the Indus River Valley civilization in northern India. So you're going to need to know that, of course, for tomorrow's quiz. And what I'm going over here with the concepts are most likely going to be the exact short answer questions that you will see. Okay, that's one of the benefits of being here tonight. I cannot see the chat yet because I'm sharing some of these banners, but I will check it in just a moment. Okay, status of women is the last key concept that I really want to go over. And really, you got to think about, okay, how were women treated in Sumerian Egypt in comparison to China? In Sumerian Egypt, women had a fairly good treatment in comparison to later civilizations. They were not equal, but and that's unfortunate. But they did have greater rights. They could hold jobs. They could hold property in their own name, for example. These were things that in the medieval times women could not do. So early on, Egypt and Sumer, our 2 earliest civilizations, had it right. Not entirely, but more so than later civilizations. And then when we got to section 4, we learned about China. In China, women were treated as inferior. And this is very important. And you want to make sure that you have a good understanding of that information for the short answer question. Indus River Valley, there wasn't a whole lot because we couldn't decipher their writing system. So we just don't have a whole lot of information there. Okay, next we are going to move on. I'm going to give you a little bit of a bonus here. I'm going to talk about the 2 questions that you're going to have on short answer from the AMSCO reading. So let's go ahead and put that on the screen. So this is going to be the first question that you're going to be up against on AMSCO's reading section that I did assign. And that is going to be, what are the 4 question types that will be covered on the AP exam in May? So this is the answer to this question that will be on the quiz tomorrow. I can guarantee it. These are the 4 types of questions that you're going to see on the exam in May. Number 1, which we're going to get some practice on tomorrow, are the MCQ questions, which stand for multiple choice questions. As we learned today, those are your stimulus-based multiple choice questions where you definitely have a passage to read and then a multiple choice that refers to it and your content knowledge. The second type of question, which we will not necessarily see tomorrow, but in later chapters we will, called the SAQ. The SAQ stands for short answer questions. The short answer questions on the AP style are something that we will cover later, but I do want you to know that these are the type of questions that will be on that exam in May. The other 2 styles are the DBQ and the LEQ. These are big time essays, 3 to 5 paragraph style essays. The DBQ is known as the document based question, and the LEQ is known as the long essay question. So these are 2 very big writing components that we will definitely dive into here in the next few weeks of our class, starting to introduce those, and those will show up on some of your quizzes and exams. Okay, the second freebie that I'm going to give you, I'm going to go ahead and take that down off the screen. The second freebie that I'm going to give away is going to be the second short answer question from the AMSCO reading, and that is, what are the 3 types of historical processes that this class will focus on? And those are as follows. Number 1, comparison. So being able to compare 2 civilizations or 2 parts of history or 2 events in history, or even 2 countries and their geographic locations or their government styles or their religious practices. The second part of that would be something called causation, which is something that we started with Why Study History. We wanted to focus on why things happen. What are the causes behind major events? So causation is understanding how events are linked, of course, in the past and even from the past to the present. And then finally, there's something called continuity and change over time. So what you're looking at with that historical process is, how have things changed over time? And how have things stayed the same over time? So continuity would be staying the same. Change would be, of course, changing over time. So those are the 3 historical processes that we'll be focusing on as we go throughout the class. And those are the type of questions that, of course, you're going to see following up on the actual exam in May. So that's what you've got going on there. Looks like we've got some comments here. We've got quite a few of my students from last year making comments. So thank you for joining. I do appreciate your support, gentlemen. We got next up, we are going to go into the question and answer session. So I am now monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions for me, this is your time to ask. I would love to help answer those questions and concerns in going into tomorrow's assessment. So I'm waiting and I'm ready. Remember, we want to rise to the occasion. We want to rise to the challenge. That's our number 1 theme. And then, of course, I want to see how well you do on that AP. Remember, the low score that you can get is a 5. Okay. I am looking for questions. I'm not seeing any just yet, so I'm still waiting. Charlie, not a question for the quiz, but that is a Van Hoosen flex. Okay, there you go. That's you want to get the slim fit, and you'll be really good to go. John says, when did we go over monarchies? Okay, good question, John. So when we're talking about monarchies, anytime that you have a dynastic rule, okay, so when we talk about dynasties where there's a series of rulers from the same family, that's a monarchy, because you have a single ruler that's going to go ahead and pass that down, all right, from generation to generation. And so anytime you have a dynasty, that's a monarchy. And so that's why I've put it onto the review sheet. And if you want to know the actual definition, a monarchy is, of course, rule by a single person, usually a king or a queen. Okay, let's scroll back up. We have Nick. Can you explain the mandate of heaven? Sure. So the mandate of heaven is basically where in China, but even in other places, they had something similar. It's the belief, okay, that the ruler is granted the right to rule and the power to rule by God or / the gods. And so the mandate of heaven is this ideology that the ruler has been given divine power from the gods to make decisions on behalf of the people. This then goes into the dynastic cycle, which you can find more information on page 54, which I did denote on your review sheet. But what that talks about is how throughout the dynastic cycle, you have a ruling family and they are granted this mandate of heaven, and things are going really well at first. But over the course of time, could be 10 years, could be 15 years, could even be 25 years. Some bad things happen. Maybe there's a natural disaster, a major flood, an earthquake like the Indus River Valley, or there's an invasion. These type of things cause people to lose faith in the ruling system and the ruling dynastic family. And so they start to rebel and they start to say that, hey, maybe they've lost the mandate of heaven. Maybe it's time to replace them with a new dynasty. And so that's really, those are the basics of what you want to know about the mandate of heaven. Okay, next question comes from Vea. Excellent question. Can you define all the periods of Egypt? Okay, let me go at this one. This is in the middle portion of your key terms. You've got the Old Kingdom, you've got the Middle Kingdom, and you have the New Kingdom. Today I had them on the slideshow, which I did post onto the gradebook bulletin board and my weekly agenda. But let's go over what's most important to know about each of these. Not so much the dates, okay? The Old Kingdom, though, what you really want to know about the Old Kingdom is that this is the time in which those great, large structures of the pyramids were created. And what this shows is that the Old Kingdom was extremely powerful, because if you were able to build those pyramids and take all of the work and all of the time and the labor that it took to create those, you have a very strong government system and you have great control over the people. And so that's what you really want to know about the Old Kingdom. Now, at the end of the Old Kingdom, though, things started to break down. Okay, at the end of the Old Kingdom, things started to definitely break down and there were some rebellions. Okay. And when that takes place, what happens is you need a resurgence of power from strong rulers. And that gets us into the Middle Kingdom. So the Middle Kingdom is marked by a resurgence of power by Egyptian pharaohs, leaders, lawmakers, judges, priests, so on and so forth. They start to get things right. They start to restore law and order. That lasts for a while. And then toward the end of the Middle Kingdom, you have another time period of tumultuous periods where people are rebelling, striking back out against the government. And what takes place then is they are conquered by the Hyksos. As we saw on the slideshow today, the Hyksos come in and conquer they rule for about 70 to 100 years based on what you're reading and your estimates. But the New Kingdom is when Egypt then drives the Hyksos out of Egypt and then regains power once again. So there you have it, the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and then, of course, the New Kingdom. Okay, we're moving on down the list. I'm a little bit behind, so I will get to you. Don't worry. Okay, the next question is, can you define Loess? Yes, Loess is a form of silt. The difference with Loess is that it's primarily from China, and it is blown into the crop fields by the wind. Okay, so silt is created by flooding rivers and the water sitting on the soil and turning it into a very irrigated, silty, murky, but very fertile soil. Loess is on top of hills where it rains and the water runs down. And as that water runs down, it irrigates that soil. And then when it dries, the winds from the higher elevated areas blow the Loess into areas that crop fields then can be created. And there you have another form of silt because it's actually very fertile because it is from an irrigated past. So that's basically how you would define Loess, and how it differs a little bit from silt. Okay, Ava says, what should we write for the short answer question 1? Were you talking about, I think you're probably talking about the short answer question 1 that's on the review sheet. So it says, compare and contrast Egypt and Mesopotamia. Okay, this is going to be an extended response style question because it gives you some categories, right? It talks about, hey, geography, government, religion, how did they treat women? So when you're comparing Egypt and Mesopotamia, or you could also say Sumer, when you're talking about government, they're both theocracies. So they both have a lot of religion involved with government. Okay, so the ruler is usually a priest early on, like we learned in Sumer. The early rulers were priests. In Egypt, the ruler is the pharaoh who has divine power. They worship the pharaoh as a living god. Okay, so theocracy would be number 1, the style of government. But there is a difference here because in Sumer, remember that they were divided up into independent city-states, whereas in Egypt, they became a unified empire. So that's one example of how you would break that down as far as the government. Geography, pretty similar. You're talking about desert. If you wanted to compare and be very particular, which is what you should do, Egypt had better natural barriers. They were surrounded by desert on the south, east, and the west. And then the north, they're covered by the Mediterranean Sea. Sumer didn't have as great of natural barriers of defense, and they were more open to invasion. So that's one geographic difference, but they both had rivers, and both of those rivers flooded and helped, of course, propagate agriculture. So those are some examples to get you started there. I already sort of talked about the treatment of women in both. Religion, you could say they're both polytheistic. They both worshipped multiple gods or numerous gods. Okay, moving on down the list. Okay, Alexia, I think I covered that at this point, right? About the Middle and the New Kingdoms. Charlie, can you go over King Narmer? Okay, I started with King Narmer. King Narmer, also known as Menes, was credited with unifying Upper and Lower Egypt around 3000 BC. So that's the most important thing to know. He would really be the first emperor or king of a unified Egypt. Okay. I sort of just compared, Alex, Egypt and Mesopotamia. If you were listening there, should have got that. Compare and contrast, I talked about some of the difference also, Dominic. Can you briefly compare the 4 river-based civilizations? Sure, we got Sophie here. Okay, briefly compare. So if you are thinking about the 4 river-based civilizations, first of all, let's talk about them. Number 1 is Sumer or Mesopotamia, based on the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Number 2 is, of course, Egypt. Number 3 is the Indus River Valley. And then number 4 is China. When you're thinking about comparison, what are some differences? What are some similarities? You want to think about, okay, government, religion, treatment of women, those kind of categories. So let's do one. Okay, let's do one. Let's talk about government. Indus River Valley, we don't have a whole lot of information. Unfortunately, what we have is a lack of written documentation because we couldn't translate the language. But what we do know is that we saw some cities like Mohenjo-Daro, and we saw some other fortified cities that were planned, which tells us they must have had stratified government systems. If you look at China, we have the same type of structure. We have cities, we have city-states, we have defense walls around cities, which tells us that government was strong. Government collected taxes. Government created irrigation canals. The same goes for Egypt and Sumer. So you have a lot of similarities in government, and you have a lot of powerful government that collected taxes and that used that tax money to create structures like dams, like wooden buildings in China, like mud brick defense walls in Sumer, and also mud brick roads or brick roads and structures in the Indus River Valley. So if you're looking at government, that's a good one to say, hey, they all had very powerful governments that collected taxes and used the tax money or revenue to create structures like the pyramids, like the ziggurats, and like defense walls. If you're looking at religion, all of these civilizations were polytheistic. So you have a similarity there when you're making the comparison. You have a lot of similarities. And then geographically, remember, they're all based on rivers. So they all depended on the fortuitous advantages that rivers provided, such as fishing, cleanliness, drinking water, so on and so forth. So that's something that, those are three very good examples of how you can compare all four civilizations. Think about categories. Think about categories there. Gabby, that was your question as well. So there you go. You've got a little bit of that covered as well. Okay, let's see. Do we have to use the four rivers by specific name, or does it not matter? Okay, so there's a lot of rivers. Okay, I put them on the key places. So on my key places, I have the Tigris, I have the Euphrates, I have the Nile, I have the Indus River, and then I have the Wangha, and I have the Changyang. If you know those, you should be in really good shape. Okay, those would be, I think, in specific, what you really want to focus on. The ones that are listed on the review sheet should be very pertinent and helpful for you. Okay, Via says, do we need to know both similarities and differences when we compare Egypt and Mesopotamia? Yes, there are some differences, remember, that we talked about as far as the flood patterns of the rivers. Remember, the Nile was very predictable, whereas the Tigris and Euphrates were a little bit less predictable. You never knew when it was going to flood. When you're looking at the way that they had the pharaoh system versus the independent city-states, where you have a unified Egypt versus independent city-states in Sumer, for example, those are some of the differences that you want to add to a lot of those similarities that I was just talking about a bit ago. Okay, how do you want us to compare the rivers? Well, I feel like the rivers are very similar. The one thing that I just mentioned that I think is a good comparison is the flood patterns, like where the Nile was very predictable. We knew in July it was going to flood, and we knew it was going to recede back to its normal width in October. That's one very good example right there. So other than that, you have pretty much the same thing going on with the flood patterns and the silt and the Loess. So very similar, except for the fact that some are more predictable than others. King Narmer on a repeat. Yes. Narmer is credited with unifying Upper and Lower Egypt, creating Egypt as a unified kingdom or empire. So we had two separate kingdoms, Upper and Lower Egypt. King Narmer brings those together into one single and unified empire. Hammurabi. Okay, Brooklyn says Hammurabi. Yes, I can go over Hammurabi. Hammurabi was an early king of Babylon, most well known for Hammurabi's code. Okay, Hammurabi's code is also known as an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It's really one of the first documented codes of laws with punishments listed that we've ever seen in our history. Okay. Okay, so exactly what do you... All right, here we go, Alexia. Exactly what do you want us to know about the rivers, where they are located, how they are used? Yes, definitely the functionality of the rivers. What does a river provide? We had a little discussion about that in class. And so when we looked at that, what we were talking about is how the fish, the transportation, the hygiene, the drinking water, all of those factors are, of course, very important to know about each one of the rivers, which they all provided. And then you want to know about the flooding. Was it predictable? Was it unpredictable? And then, of course, how those things impacted agriculture and, of course, the key civilizations that we learned about. So hopefully that will help you there. Okay. Yes, Gavin. Hello. How are you, sir? I appreciate you joining. But I'm looking for key questions on the subject matter. Okay. I'm really trying to help you get ready for this quiz. So thanks to all of those former students that are supporting. I do appreciate you. But we're on chapter 2. So we're talking about Egypt, Sumer, and so on and so forth. So keep firing away with questions, ladies and gents. I really want to help you. Kicker Kirk, my man, also playing linebacker. Big kick. to basically steal the win for us on last Friday. So sign of strength there. Can I briefly go over your boy Sargon of Akkad? Yes, Sargon of Akkad is one of my favorites because he's one of the earliest known historical figures. And Sargon basically creates the world's first empire by conquering all of the independent city-states in North and South Sumer or Mesopotamia. And this happens around 2350 BC. You don't have to memorize that date, just giving you some context there. But yeah, Sargon is credited with creating the world's first documented empire, where he, as the single ruler, conquers Kish, Lagash, Umma, and bringing all those formerly independent city-states under his control. So that's what you're going to have as far as Sargon of Akkad. Okay, next is, what will we focus on? What will the fill in the blank focus on? The key terms. The key terms. If you know your key terms, you're going to be in good shape on the fill in the blank. Remember, though, I'm not giving you a word bank this time. This time you have to come up with the term on your own. So you won't have that helpful idea to have the word bank there for you. You're going to have to come up with the answers on your own. Babylon. Okay, Babylon is an early city of Mesopotamia. And Babylon was very structured. As we know, we had the Code of Laws by Hammurabi. It's one of the more famous cities. It's a famous ancient biblical city as well. That would be about all you'd need to know. You know, that it was part of the Sumerian / Mesopotamian city-states. Later, Babylon became the capital of the Chaldeans. The Persians controlled this area. The Chaldeans conquer the Persians eventually, and they conquer the Assyrians as well. And then they formed their capital at Babylon with the famous Chaldean king Nebuchadnezzar, who built the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. So those are some of the key ideas that you're going to want to know there. Okay, let's see. Can you go over the New Kingdom? What I wanted you to know about the New Kingdom is that this is the time in which the Egyptians drive out the Hyksos and then regain control of Egypt. That's what you really want to focus on, Jonathan, for the New Kingdom. Okay, we have any other questions? I'd love to answer your questions. I know that this is going to be a challenging quiz. I'm keeping it in my pocket here. I've got one more surprise in my pocket for you when we have a lull in time, and I'd like to see if that'll work. But stay with me because I've got one more giveaway for you here toward the end. Master Janda says, who is responsible for inventing the irrigation systems? And Alex, let's go to Alex first. Master Josh, I'll get to you, but Alex, what came in here first with, are Sumer and Mesopotamia the same? Good question. Mesopotamia is referring to the land in between the two rivers, okay? The Fertile Crescent, or Mesopotamia being between the Tigris and Euphrates, right? Sumer is a portion within Mesopotamia, okay? That's really how you want to look at that. But yeah, when you say Sumerians or Mesopotamians, you're basically talking about, yes, the same region, okay? Master Janda says, who's responsible for inventing the irrigation systems? It's a good question. I'm going to be honest with you and tell you that we really don't know who was the first to invent irrigation, okay? The first documented civilization that we know had it are the Sumerians, followed closely thereafter by the Egyptians. But if you're asking me, I believe that irrigation was around before 3000 BC. There is definitely some group of villagers that channeled water off of the river to water their crops. There's evidence of that, but they weren't very large civilizations, and so they often don't get credited with it. But if I had to give you like an answer, I'm going to say the Sumerians were the first to have it documented. They drew pictures, they wrote about it. So that's what I'd have to say as my blanketed answer. But I'm going to tell you that there was irrigation before that as well, Josh. Brooklyn says, can you go over the decline of the Indus River Valley? Of course. The Indus River Valley went into decline because of what we believe earthquakes. And the earthquakes and the tectonic plates were striking against each other during the earthquake function, and they altered the course of the Indus River, which actually made it dry out because of the different pathways and the mountain runoff ceasing to exist. And so what happens is they lose the Indus River in certain parts, And with the loss of that much agriculture, the people go into decline. If you're losing food, you're losing population. People are dying due to starvation. When starvation sets in, it leads to what we call a domino effect. So if you have starvation, you have people hungry, they get sick easier, and then disease spreads faster because more and more of the population is sick and malnourished. Okay, and so that is kind of the domino effect, and what we believe happened to decline in the Indus River Valley. Dominic, I'm going to remove you, okay? Cut that out. That's not appropriate. Let's see what we have here. Narmer, I went over a few times. He's the guy who united Upper and Lower Egypt. What do we need to know about the Middle Kingdom, says Grace? Okay, so the Middle Kingdom is basically a time period in which you had some tumultuous events in the later Old Kingdom, and this is a time in which strong rulers and pharaohs regained power. Okay, regained power. And so that's one of the things that you really have to focus in on there, Grace, is when strong rulers and pharaohs come back into power, and of course they restore law and order, and that's the basic idea right there for the Middle Kingdom. First three concepts on the review, says Grace. So Sumerian inventions would be the wheel, the sail, bronze, cuneiform. I think I'm missing one. The plow. Those are all Sumerian inventions. The second concept that I went over were the Egyptian inventions like mummification, papyrus, the calendar system. I said they were the first true surgeons because of their understanding of human anatomy. I think that was it. And then the third one that I went over was the decline of the Indus River Valley, which I just went over a second ago about how the earthquake set in and the plate tectonic shifting and drying up the river, causing the river to change its pattern. Okay, let's see here. Repeat what I said about Hammurabi. Sure, Hammurabi creates the first documented code of laws out of the city of Babylon. It was a very strict code of laws, and it was basically like an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So if you, let's say you blacken someone's eye, they could blacken your eye if you were on the same level. Now, there were different levels, varying levels of society. Like if you were an upperclassman, then you wouldn't be able to generally get the same punishment. Well, you'd luckily not get the same punishment as somebody who was a lower classman. So there were some stratifications within the code as well. John, thank you. Hieroglyphics is another Egyptian invention. That's the one that I didn't mention. Cuneiform for Sumer, hieroglyphics for Egypt. Sign of strength by you, John. Jay Simpson, Babylon is modern day Iraq. Okay, modern day Iraq, along the Euphrates River. Okay, along the Euphrates River of Sumer. That's where it was located. Justin K says, can I compare and contrast Egypt and Mesopotamia again? When you're looking at the categories there, you want to think about government, religion, treatment of women, geography. So I'll compare and contrast one more time government. One of the key things is that they're both theocracy. So they both believe that their leader had some type of divine right from the gods, like in China as well. But one of the big differences is that Sumer was, in contrast, they were divided up into city-states, whereas Egypt, like we learned with Narmer, eventually became a unified kingdom. And that's a major difference governmentally. And that's something that you want to be able to contrast. So instead of going over all of them again, that's an example. And you can use sort of the other categories to break that down. Yes, Hannah. Yes. Here's a good question. So when you're comparing Egypt and Mesopotamia or Egypt and Sumer, you want to think about the same categories with the other groups. Yeah. When you're comparing all four, that's a great route to take. No doubt about it. Babylon, just a key city. It's along the Euphrates River. It was a site of civilization in Sumer, and Hammurabi was one of the early kings there, who developed a code of laws, which shows you that they had very stratified government system that ran efficiently based on laws and punishments. Okay, Alex wants to go over Sumer. Well, Sumer is a region of the Fertile Crescent. It's about the size of Connecticut, Rhode Island, smaller states in really the modern United States. So when you're thinking about it, it was divided up into independent city states. So that's one of the most important things to understand about Sumer, because they were all independent. They kind of traded with each other, but they could also go to war. And eventually those wars became so frequent that it altered the scope of who were the leaders. Remember, we started as priests. And then when these wars become frequent, it turned into military leaders being the kings. So that's one thing you want to know about Sumer. But that independent status of the city-states and then the warring of the city-states made them very weak. And that's when your boy Sargon comes in and attacks and conquers. So that's one of the things that you really want to focus in on there as well. Good question. Alexia says, should we have the steps of the dynastic cycle memorized? Not necessarily. You know, the chart on page 54 is important to study, but what you want to get from that is how that cycle flows. You know, you want to really get the idea that, okay, there's a dynasty that's in power. They're doing a really good job. And then eventually though, things start to happen that break down that power. And then rebellion sets in, right? And then when that rebellion sets in, the people are calling for a removal of the current ruler because they've lost the mandate of heaven, and then replacement by a new dynasty or a new ruling family. That's really the big picture. So I don't think you need to try. I'm not going to ask you to repeat or regurgitate all the steps of the dynastic cycle. That's not the goal of what I'm trying to do. But that's what I would say for that one. Okay, Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom describing the time periods. Yeah, you don't really need to know the actual dates, Tony. But what you're going to need to know about the Old, Middle, and New Kingdom is exactly what I said at the beginning. If you missed it, the Old Kingdom is when the pyramids were constructed. The Middle Kingdom is when strong rulers come back into power, restoring law and order. And the New Kingdom is when the Hyksos were driven out and Egypt took control independently once again. Okay, NGX says, will we have time to finish school? Not this time. No, that was a half a day deal. This time you will not. You will need to finish. Listen carefully. You will need to finish this quiz in the allotted time for class. We have 45 minutes. The first 2 to 3 minutes, I'll be collecting your documents. After that, you have the rest of the time. So no, you have to understand that AP, like you saw in the video today, all right, AP is a time constraint. You have 55 multiple choice in 55 minutes. So you need to start getting used to that time constraint. That is the way that it works. But you should have plenty of time to get through this quiz. There will not be any after school quiz taking tomorrow. No. Okay, I think we're in a lull of questions here. Vea, no, I don't think so during seminar either. I want you to focus on meeting the challenge and getting the quiz done during the allotted time. Okay, think of more questions. Okay, think of more questions. Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate it. Thanks to all my supporters there and all my current students and everybody else. I do appreciate you. I'm hoping that you're gaining some knowledge from this, and this is helpful for you for the quiz. That's the goal. Now, I do want to pause for station identification here. I have another freebie to give you for those of you who have been on here loyally and asking questions and listening and learning. Here you go. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to actually show you one of the questions that you're going to see tomorrow on the AP portion. Give me a second, and I will pull this up. I want to share the screen. So what I need to be able to do is pull up a picture that I took of the actual test. So here it is. Hopefully you can see this. And what it is a question that comes from Hammurabi's code. I'm going to flip back real quick. Okay, I can see that you can see it. So that should be working. Okay, so what I want to show you is, here's an actual question down here. The consequences imposed by Hammurabi's code most strongly illustrated which of the following about Babylonian society. So here's the code. Here's part of the code. These are clauses 195 to 202. Now, if you read that, you can read this while you're looking here, but I'm going to tell you, here's the question. The consequences imposed by Hammurabi's code most strongly illustrate which of the following about Babylonian society. Here are your options. Letter A says the social hierarchy was marked by inequalities. Letter B says society was relatively egalitarian in nature. C says slavery was the most common form of labor. And D says the society was patriarchal. Patriarchal means run by men. If you read this, so now that what I do, if I were taking the quiz, is I would read the question first, and then I would read all the questions first from the document. Then I would read the document, and I'd focus on this. Yeah, this is exactly Hammurabi's code. It was put into play very, very early. It's very old. It's in the BC era. So I'm looking for a couple things, and here, let me give you a clue. Right here's some basic punishments, like if anyone fractures the bones of another, they shall have their bones fractured in punishment. So it's basically an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That is literally clause 197. Okay, but here's where it gets interesting. It says, if anyone destroys the eye or fractures the bone of anyone's slave, he, upon being convicted, is to pay half of his value to the owner of the slave. So they didn't care about the slaves at all. The slave got his eye poked out. The slave gets nothing. Okay, the slave owner gets money. So that right there is all I needed to know to answer this question. That right there is all you need to answer this question, because that tells you that A is correct. The social hierarchy was marked by inequalities. That's an example of an inequality. Here it is again. If anyone knocks out the teeth of one, his equal in rank, his teeth are to be knocked out. But look at this one. If he's knocked out the teeth of a freedman, he is to pay 1/3 of the total of silver. So you see that there's different statuses. There's inequalities. Not everybody's the same level. There's different punishments, of course, for each of those different groupings. And so that's why A, here, the social hierarchy was marked by inequalities, is the correct answer. So look at that. You just got one answer given to you right there. Hopefully you could see that. It's hard for me to tell, but I'm hoping that you can see that. Okay, now that was the surprise. Yes, that was the surprise right there. Narmer again. Boy, Narmer is popular today. Okay, King Narmer is the person credited with unifying Upper and Lower Egypt around 3000 BC. Thank you, Vea. Sign of strength by you. Okay. Any other key questions? I'm here for you. I'll stay on as long as I need to. So I'm done with my routine. I did everything that I wanted to do. I've answered quite a few questions, but I'm still going to stay on for a few more moments to answer anything else. All right. Okay, so I'm going to go into I'll go into some final comments here. Remember, this is going to be a challenge. It's meant to be a challenge. That's part of the class. I would say you really do want to prepare. The way that you would prepare is by utilizing your review sheet. Okay. Quizzing yourself off of the review sheet. So that's why I have you do it on a separate sheet of paper. And then one of the things that you really need to focus in on is rereading your notes. I would have already read my notes before this session. I would read them again tonight before I go to bed. I would read them tomorrow in the morning. I would read them tomorrow during my seminar class. I would read those notes. I would focus on that section 4 guided reading. I would focus on my review sheet. All of those things, if you can do all of those things, you should be successful. You should be in pretty good shape and you should be ready. Would I pray? Yeah. Listen, I'm a big believer in prayer, but I would pray for the right things. Listen, this quiz in the grand scheme of life, I'm probably not praying for this quiz. What I would pray for, if I gave you some advice on how to pray, and I'm not the end all be all, okay? I'm not a priest. I just try to be a good person. But listen, if you're praying tonight before you go to bed, the one thing that you should pray is for God's guidance and for your health and safety and for the health and safety of your family and your friends and for the health and safety of everyone in these tumultuous times. I mean, you got to think about people who are struggling from the pandemic. People are struggling from the hurricane. Think about the women in Afghanistan and the Americans in Afghanistan and what they're going through. Those are the types of things that you should really be praying for. If you wanted to have a prayer for this quiz, it would be asking the good Lord for guidance and providing you to use your talents to the fullest. Don't ask to get an A. Don't ask to get an A score, but pray for the right things. That's really important. And pray for your families. Say thank you to your parents tonight before you go to bed. I think that's of the utmost importance right now, because they're supporting you and they're there for you, and they want you to do your best as well, just like I do. So, pray that prayer of gratitude and give thanks to the appropriate people, and of course to the good Lord. Oh, we got a nice comment there by Big Dom. Dom, yeah, Dominic is the owner of Princess Mediterranean, which I fully endorse. It's located on Maple and Welch Road, okay, or Pontiac Trail in Welch. I think it's Maple and Welch. But if you go there, yeah, my favorite dish is the chicken cream chop, which I know Dom's a really good chef. And by using code Langle at the restaurant, you can get 20% off, which is a pretty big deal. So thanks, Dom. Really appreciate that. Justin K., let's see. You want to go over the 4 river-based civilizations? Yes, Sumer, Egypt, Indus River Valley, and China. Okay, those are your 4 river-based civilizations that you need to know. Josh, the main points for each of the 4 sections, basically knowing the rivers, what they brought to the party, or to the table, I should say, and the names of the civilizations from each of the 4 sections, which I just kind of went over. Sumer / Mesopotamia, Egypt, and then, of course, China and the Indus River Valley. Brooklyn, which question? Type it in again. Which question do you want me to answer again? If you're still there. The answer to the multiple choice was, of course, A, because it was talking about Hammurabi's code and there being inequalities, and you can see clearly that there were slaves, there were free men, there were upper class and lower class. Alex, hey, my brother-in-law joined up. That's pretty cool, all the way from Dallas, Texas. This is a good question. Let's pull it up here. Did the fall of Mesopotamia coincide with the onset of the Egyptian civilization, or was one the direct result of the other? Basically, they were coexisting. Around 3000 BC, we have written records from both. Sumer had some of the earlier city-states, but Egypt was up and coming. As we talked earlier, Egypt was divided up into 2 separate kingdoms. So eventually they become combined, and that happened a little bit later than some of the early city-states of Sumer. So I would say the fall of Mesopotamia didn't really lead to the rise of Egypt, as they did coexist. Of course, when Mesopotamia was conquered by Sargon of Akkad, of course, I think power may have shifted more to Egypt, but not necessarily anything major. They were kind of coexisting prior to that. Ava says, do we need to write down the key places? You do not need to do that for the assignment. The assignment is listed at the top right, which is to number and define the key terms, the figures, and the concepts, of course, on a separate sheet. Okay, I think we're good to go. And I'm going to say have a great night. We've been on for about 50 minutes, which was about the time period that we spent last time. So, hey, best of luck tomorrow. Give it your best shot. Don't get discouraged if you don't do well. If you do very well, that's a great sign. But I want to thank all of you for joining. And of course, if you need anything else, you can always email me. I'll be checking early morning. You could always come see me in the classroom in the morning as well. Have a great night, and God bless all of you.